Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at this afternoon's webinar with Target Jobs. You're joining us today for part 3 of the Target Jobs Solicitor Series, where we're going to be talking next steps in terms of your qualifying routes into law after completing your undergraduate degree. I'm Rachel, I'm an editor at Target Jobs, and I'm going to be your host today. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Jill Howell-Williams from the University of Law, who's joining us to talk us through everything you need to know. Before we get started, I'm just going to say you can view the first 2 parts of this Solicitor series on the Target Jobs YouTube channel if you missed them. Part 1's on first year schemes and open days and campus ambassadors, and part 2 is on assessment centres, vacation schemes and training contracts. But today, like I say, we're going to be talking next steps in terms of the SQE, the LPC, any other options. So myself and Jill are going to chat through some talking points. And then towards the later part of the webinar, you'll have a chance to have your own questions answered by Jill. So while we're talking, please do feel free, and I encourage you to put your questions to us. If you see a question that somebody's asked that you like, please do upvote it, because that will help me to see which questions are the most popular and the ones that we should really prioritise first. We will try to get through as many questions as possible. So please keep trying to keep your questions relevant to the topic in terms of the SQE, and try to make it so that everybody attending the webinar is going to find the question helpful. I'm afraid we won't be able to answer questions that are too specific to individual circumstances. And if Jill and myself cannot answer you, we will point you to where we think you can find the answer. But now I'm going to pass over to Jill, so Jill can tell us a little bit about herself and her work.
Thanks very much, Rachel. And just to say, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon, and great to see so many people attending this webinar about the SQE. So my name is Jill Howell-Williams. I am the National Programme Director at the University of Law, responsible for the SQE. And that's literally what I have been living and breathing for the last 2 years since I took that role on. Before that, I was the Dean at our Moorgate campus, responsible for the students and the faculty there. And then before I joined the University of Law, I am a dual qualified lawyer. I first of all started out life as a barrister. I requalified as a solicitor a short time after that, and was in practice for a number of years as a corporate lawyer before moving into legal education. So I've seen a lot of different pathways to qualifying in our profession over the years that I've been involved in it, and so it's obviously been very exciting for me to be so involved now with this new regime, the SQE, and I hope that this afternoon will be a great opportunity for you to ask lots of questions about what's in store for you and how you're going to qualify in this future SQE world.
Thank you, Jo. That's a brilliant introduction. I think makes it very clear that you're perfectly placed to give us insights into this topic. So thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to it, getting into it. So let's start with quite a broad topic before we get into the nitty-gritty. So what would you say are the qualifying routes for students who've just completed or they're about to complete their undergraduate degree and they want to become a solicitor? What are their options, their next steps?
Okay, so like everything to do with law, there is the devil in the detail. So it really depends at the moment as to what degree you're currently studying. Now, I imagine that the vast majority of people here this afternoon are law undergraduates, but there may be some non-law undergraduates who are interested about joining the profession. So I'm going to sort of start off by qualifying my advice here, because it will really depend on whether you're a current law student or whether you're a non-law graduate. So let's start off with law graduates, assuming that you're the majority here in the room. So at the moment, as a law undergraduate, you have 2 routes to qualify at the moment. You can use what was the traditional route, which I'm sure you're all familiar with and have heard about, which was using the LPC, or you can now qualify as a solicitor using the new regime, the SQE. So if I just basically explain the key differences between the two, and then I'll talk about non-law graduates, because the position for you is slightly different. So for law graduates, if you wish to use the LPC, you may continue to qualify using that route, because there's a long transitional period. So the SQE came in September of last year. We've had one set of live assessments since then, but there's a transitional period of about 10 years as the LPC it ceases to become a way of qualifying as a solicitor in England and Wales, although I suspect the LPC will effectively be phased out well before that 10-year period expires. So under that regime, basically what you need to do to qualify as a solicitor is you need a qualifying law degree. So anybody that's currently studying a law degree has a qualifying law degree. You need to pass the legal practice course, which is an accredited course accredited by the SRA, and has to be delivered by an accredited law school. You have to do a 2-year training contract, or recognised period of training as it's more formally known as, and you need to meet the SRA's character and suitability requirements. So those are the 4 ingredients for qualifying under what we would call the former regime, the LPC regime. So with the SQE, what are the differences? So here, the requirements are that you have to have a degree, you have to pass the SQE assessments, that's SQE 1 and 2. You need to complete 2 years qualifying work experience, which is similar to a training contract, but it is different. And you also need, as with the LPC regime, to meet the SRA's character and suitability requirements. Now, on the face of it, it all looks like it's very, very similar, but actually there are some significant and subtle differences between the 2 regimes. So first of all, I'm sure you've all noticed that under the SQE, the requirement is just to have a degree and not a qualifying law degree. Now, I think that set a lot of hairs running when that was first announced a couple of years ago, with people assuming that you could qualify to become a solicitor without actually knowing any law whatsoever, and because of this lack of requirement for a law degree. And that is simply not the case. So for those who are doing law in the room today, I'm just going to reassure you and say that's great, because that's going to go an awful long way to help you prepare both for your LPC route to qualification and the SQE, and I'll explain why that's the case in a moment. So the other, I suppose, key difference is that the SQE is an examination. It's the Solicitor's Qualifying Examination. The LPC is a course. So then again, those are the 2 fundamental differences. And because the SQE is an examination, there's no requirement for you to study a particular course with a particular training provider. So again, there's a sort of, you can see there's a degree of deregulation there in this new pathway. However, having said that, again, it looks like you don't need to do a particular period of study or do it with a particular provider, but actually the reality is that for most graduates that want to qualify under the SQE regime, you will need to do some form of preparation for it, and we can look at what those different sort of options are in a moment. So I hope that deals with law students, and I apologize in advance for the fact that it is complex. For non-law students, in a weird way, it's a bit simpler for you, because I'm afraid you have no option but to go down the SQE pathway now as a non-law graduate. The last conversion course, which amounted to a qualifying law degree, they're often known as the GDL, the Graduate Diploma in Law, or the CPE, they rolled out in September of last year. And so for you who are currently studying as undergraduates, there are no more QLDs available for you to convert on, and you would have to go down the SQE route. So in a way, there's less of a dilemma for you to know which regime to use. But for law graduates, as I say, you have got a choice of both, although I think that choice will become more firmly steered or skewed in favour of SQE the more time that passes. And we see as a university, with our conversations that take place on an almost daily basis with law firms and legal employers, that the big tipping point when we think most employers will be going down the kind of SQE route is in 2023. That's when they will expect their future talent to qualify using the SQE route. So it really will depend, I guess, on whether you're a first year or a third year student as to whether those two options are actually practically going to be available to you.
Great, thank you, Jo. And I mean, you've touched on some differences already, but were there any other main differences between the traditional LPC route and the new SQE route that you wanted to highlight?
Yes, I suppose it is just making that really important point that the Solicitors Qualifying Examination, SQE, is this new independent centralised assessment for all would-be solicitors who want to qualify in England and Wales. And as I said before, there's no prescribed training course for the SQE assessments, although obviously lots of law schools will be providing relevant training. It's a centralised assessment, and therefore everybody that's going to go down this route will be sitting the same assessment. So in the previous regime, in the LPC, which is a prescribed and regulated programme of training, each law school that runs the LPC, so whether you go to the University of Law or BPP or another university, the law schools themselves set those assessments, albeit that they're regulated and prescribed by the SRA. So there are sort of therefore kind of really interesting fundamental differences between the two regimes, and that everybody's doing the same assessment. And again, we can look in a moment, if you wish me to, Rachel, at what the SQE assessments actually involve, because they are quite different from the assessments that you would currently face if you were doing the LPC, which were are much more akin to the sort of assessments that you'd be used to doing as an undergraduate on a law degree or any degree. So lots of problem solving questions and knowledge based questions, where the SQE has really moved the dial in terms of the sorts of assessments that you will face if you go down that route.
No problem. Thank you very much. And I just want to touch on quickly, because I have seen a question pop up along these lines as well in the chat box. In terms of, the SQE is the main route. Just to spell it out, to make sure we're really clear for students, are there any other options for students if they want to qualify as a solicitor or perhaps take on an alternative legal position?
Oh, yes. I mean, these are the two options if you want to qualify as a solicitor in England and Wales and actually go on to the role of solicitors, and there's no sort of way around that. But what I've seen over the last 5 years is a really interesting sort of diversification in the legal profession, and there are, I think, some really exciting opportunities and new roles that are coming into law firms which recognise the different elements involved in delivering legal services in the modern world. So, for example, as I'm sure you're all aware, technology, it dominates every sector, and the kind of changes that it is making and the disruption it is making equally applies to the delivery of legal services. So some firms, and I'd say it's probably the larger firms, but also smaller firms are adopting technology to support the delivery of service, but larger firms are offering really interesting sort of legal technologist type roles. So for any of you there who have a kind of interest in that, I think there's an enormous opportunity there to kind of think about applying for a role within a law firm, within their sort of innovation and tech teams. Similarly, a lot of legal services involve managing what are kind of quite big projects when you're doing some sort of enormous cross-border infrastructure project with numerous lawyers, clients, multiple jurisdictions. A lot of it is about managing and pushing along different pieces of work and processes. And so legal project management is another area that's really developed out in law firms, and some law students are going into that as a sort of area of specialization and looking at the kind of the process of delivering legal services rather than actually legal services themselves. So those are two kind of opportunities. I am sure that the SQE will throw up other opportunities for students. And I think one that's certainly already taking grip is paralegaling. So a lot of students that in the past were unfortunate in getting a training contract became paralegals in law firms. And it's a great career pathway. But what I'm seeing is that a lot of those paralegals are now qualifying as lawyers using the SQE route. So there are paralegals who've done the LPC, so they're exempt from some of the SQE already. And what's great for them as well is that the paralegal work that they've done, whilst it isn't a training contract, will amount to qualifying work experience. And again, I think that's a really big difference between the two regimes, in that a recognised period of training, or the training contract, is very rigid, very structured. Qualifying work experience got some parameters around it, but it's very fluid, and it is, I think, generating some really exciting opportunities for law students and all students who want to have a career in legal services about doing kind of slightly different roles. So yeah, watch this space. There's lots of opportunity for you all.
And would you say that's also the case for the students who may have looked into or maybe already pursuing the Chartered Legal Executive, the SILEX route?
Absolutely. So we already have students studying with us on our SQE prep courses who've gone down the SILEX route, and again, I think there's some real opportunities there. Although I would say that probably the type of work that they're doing is more sort of traditional in terms of delivering legal services. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much. That's a really great intro. And also, I think the next question really I had was, how are, the SQE has been introduced. It's still quite a new thing. Do you have any insights on how law firms are incorporating the SQE into their training for university students?
Yeah, so this has been a very interesting and I guess important part of my role as the National Programme Director for the SQE at the University of Law, because part of my job is basically to kind of produce the next generation of training for you guys to be able to qualify under the SQE regime. But of course, we've done this very closely in collaboration with law firms. So there is hardly a week that goes by when I'm not at a law firm, sadly mainly virtually, rather than going into their wonderful offices and taking advantage of their wonderful coffee and biscuits. But I have been working with a number of law firms, from sort of magic circle firms down to sort of smaller, more general or national firms, about what their requirements are. And a lot of the programs that we've developed as a university kind of effectively are driven by them as key stakeholders. So there's no doubt about it that with this deregulation, most law firms are taking the training of their future talent, i.e. you, very, very seriously, and they take your future training pathways very seriously as well. And they've been looking at this as an issue for some considerable period of time. So they're not, they're not coming to they're not latecomers to the party. They've been involved in these conversations. Now, I think one of the key differences between the SQE and the old LPC regime is what's actually assessed. So the SQE is more limited in some senses than the LPC, in that it tests knowledge and skills, but the knowledge is set in sort of some key practice contexts, which really relate to the reserved activities that solicitors are allowed to practice in. So it's property, it's wills, it's dispute resolution, it's criminal practice, and they just let business law and practice slip in there, although it's not actually a reserved activity. On the LPC, as well as covering all of those practice areas, which are really important, and they're your kind of fundamental foundation blocks for becoming a lawyer, what you would do in the LPC is you do in stage 2, you do what are called electives. And that's where you do these more specialized practice areas. So you, for example, might do acquisitions, or you could do commercial law or family law or private wealth. And that really got you ready for practice. Now, that is not included in the SQE regime in any way. And basically, the SRA, our regulator, said that's a matter for the law firms. They can provide the training they want for their future talent, but it's not required for the profession as a whole. And there's a big gap there, and law firms have been worried about it for some time. So what they have done is they've asked us to embed that very specific and focused training on those practice areas in our new programs. So those stage 2 electives have effectively been repurposed in our new SQE master's programs. But actually, the other kind of good thing is that we're now outside the constraints of the LPC, which was highly regulated. So our what I call SQE plus, so it's outside the regulatory requirements of SQE 1 and 2, has been effectively a gift to academics who've been able to look at what knowledge and skills future lawyers need, and work in collaboration with law firms and other key stakeholders to really look at what's going to be fit for purpose for the future. So, for example, in our new SQE Plus programme, we have got pervasively included, as well as that kind of technical black letter law content that you need to be able to be a good family lawyer, a good acquisitions lawyer. We've also embedded legal tech, so you'll be familiar with the key tools that you would be expected to use in practice. We have also embedded what we call the O-shaped lawyer competencies, the kind of the well-rounded lawyer competencies, of developing those really important skills that make you a better lawyer with your peers and also with your clients, and also with a number of our practice areas. We've also embedded commercial awareness and understanding the business needs and requirements of your clients. So that's been a really exciting development, and something that's been very much driven by law firms who expect their trainees to turn up on day one of qualifying work experience just as well qualified as they were under the LPC. And if they've just done SQE 1 and 2, that's simply not going to be the case. So there's a real kind of skills and knowledge gap that we're plugging there.
Lovely, thank you. And I think this leads me perfectly into my next question. You're doing a brilliant job of that, by the way, which is, what are the SQE1 and SQE2 assessments? I guess, what's life going to be like for an SQE student, essentially?
Okay, so yes. So basically what the SQE 1 and 2 do is they assess knowledge and skills. So shall we start off with SQE 1 first of all? So the SQE 1 assessment consists of 360 multiple choice questions covering something called functioning legal knowledge. And those 360 questions are divided into two papers known as Functioning Legal Knowledge 1 and Functioning Legal Knowledge 2. And the questions, the multiple choice questions, are a particular type of question. They are what we call single best answer questions. So something that you may have come across at some point in the assessment regimes that you currently are subject to in your degrees, or maybe even before you went to university. But they are tough in that the difference between a single best answer multiple choice question and a typical multiple choice question is that there may be a number of answers which are technically correct, but what you're looking for is the one that is best. So it's kind of tailored most appropriately to the client's needs and requirements. So that's quite interesting. Functioning legal knowledge itself is set over a very wide group of legal subject areas. So FLK1, Functioning Legal Knowledge 1, includes some of those practice areas that I was referring to a moment ago. So it includes business law and practice, it includes dispute resolution, and legal services, so things that you wouldn't typically study on an undergraduate law degree. But it also assesses you in contract and tort and English legal system and constitutional administrative law and retained EU law. So all of that academic law. So that's something that people didn't typically get tested on the LPC. So it's a big syllabus, and that's something that I think comes a little bit of a shock to some of our first SQE 1 students, about the fact that they had to retain their academic law knowledge from their degree. So one piece of advice I would give you all, if you're law students, is please make sure you keep all of your notes from your undergraduate days from year 1 onwards, because you will need that if you're going to use the SQE route to qualify, because that academic law is really, really important. Now, of course, don't panic if you've got rid of your notes. I know that I was very happy to get rid of mine at the end of each year, because you will have access to lots of manuals and revision aids to keep that academic law knowledge up to speed for SQE, but it is just something that I think people aren't 100% aware of. So that's one of the papers. And so 180 questions split across those subject areas. The second paper, FLK2, covers property practice, wills, solicitors' accounts, criminal law and practice, land law, and trusts. So again, you can see it's a big syllabus with a combination of practice areas and academic law subjects that you will do on your law degrees. And then, of course, ethics and professional conduct is assessed pervasively across both FLK 1 and 2. So there's an equal spread between academic law and those new professional practice contexts. So it's 50% academic law, 50% the new vocational stuff that you won't have done on a law degree. The exams are pretty chunky. I mean, we've had one sitting of SQE1 and we've talked to our students, got some quite interesting feedback on it, and they did sort of think it was quite a marathon. So each assessment, each paper is just over 5 hours. So I think that's quite tough. There is a break, don't worry. You can go and have a bite to eat and a drink in between, but they are chunky papers. And then there's a short split of time between each paper. There's a couple of days, and then you're back there doing another set of 180 questions. And they're all run from the SRA's assessment provider through Pearson VUE Test Centre. So any of you who've already done driving tests and done your knowledge tests, you'll be familiar with Pearson VUE. So again, that's quite different, because in the past, you'd have been used to sitting exams within your university or your training provider. And there's some kind of real logistical issues around people getting to these test centres, and obviously we guide our students and help support them, but that is quite a new challenge, I think, for people. So that's SQE1, and as I said, we've had one sitting, and the second assessment that you have to sit, and you can't sit it until you've passed SQE1, so again that's a slight difference from the LPC, is SQE2. So SQE2 is a skills assessment, and it covers six legal skills, 2 oral skills of advocacy and interviewing, and 4 written skills in legal research, legal writing, legal drafting, and case and matter analysis. So a lot of you who are doing law will be pretty familiar with legal research. The other skills are probably things that you would need to be well prepared for through a preparation course. And each of those skills are assessed multiple times. So there are 16 assessments in total. So that's very different from the LPC, where you are assessed in all of those skills, but only once. So it's a big assessment. And I think the other thing that, again, sort of slightly phases students on SQE2 is the fact that as well as the skills, you are assessed in your knowledge. It's a 50% split. So if, when you are advising somebody in an interview, you get your functioning legal knowledge wrong, you will be marked down. You're not just being assessed on how well you can interview a client. So keeping that functioning legal knowledge fresh for your skills assessments in SQE2 is going to be really, really important. And again, that's something that we are dealing with and giving our students kind of the top tips and tricks to sort of deal with how to retain FLK for SQE2. So I hope that's given you enough information about SQE1 and 2. Happy to ask any more specific questions on that.
Thank you. I'm sure the students, I can hear the dings. There's plenty of questions coming in, I promise you that. But first, I've got a few more questions of my own. I really wanted to touch on how difficult it is to pass the SQE, especially in terms of what students can do to prepare. I guess in theory with the SQE, it's a little bit muddy waters in terms of actually what you need to do to sit the SQE, because technically you could just go ahead and sit it, but what are the chances of passing without that prep?
Okay, so I'll start off with the kind of the bad news, and that is the pass rate from the first sitting in November for SQE1 was 53%. So 47% of students that sat that failed, which is a high fail rate. And that's exactly what the SRA intended. And the pass rate was not unexpected by us at all. But I think that is something that people need to sort of factor in. And I think there were a lot of people probably sitting that first sitting in November who were chancing it, if I'm brutally honest. It's very difficult because I don't know all of the candidates that were there, and there were about 1,000 across the whole country. I think the thing to bear in mind is that it's also an expensive assessment. So it costs £1,558 to sit SQE1. So you really want to go in as well prepared as possible. Now, there will, of course, be some students that will say, I'm not going to do a training course for this. I've got my law degree, or I've done my conversion course. I can read the manuals. I can self-study. And I'll take a punt. I have to say that's fine, but it really depends on how risk averse you are, and I also think it depends on what you want to achieve in terms of your career ambitions and kind of aspirations. Because passing SQE1 is about retaining a huge amount of knowledge, as I've outlined by the kind of breadth of the syllabus. But does it make you a good lawyer? No, it means you know a lot of stuff, but you probably don't really know how to produce all the things that actually clients want. So there's something to think about when you are getting ready for SQE1 is passing, but also getting ready for practice. And there will be different training courses for all students depending on what they want to achieve. So there'll be the sort of test prep courses, and then there'll be the courses that get you ready for the assessments, but also go a little bit further in getting you ready for practice. And that's just something to bear in mind.
Perfect. And would you mind if we touch on here, so we talked about earlier with the LPC, if you were a non-law graduate, you'd go on and you do a GDL equivalent conversion course, and that's a little bit different with the SQE now, and there's been the introduction of the PGDL. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So yeah, so now, although all you need is a degree, you certainly do need to know your academic law. And so non-law students still will need, in my view, to do some sort of period of training to kind of develop a knowledge of the 7 foundation subjects that make up half of the functioning legal knowledge. And there are lots of options. So the PGDL, which is the postgraduate diploma in law, is very much the successor to the graduate diploma in law. So that covers all of those 7 foundation subjects, and in some depth. And there's no doubt, again, I've been talking to law firms, to their graduate recruitment teams, to their learning and development teams over the last 2 years. And there's no doubt that law firms law firms do think that it's really important that their future recruits have got those sort of fundamental principles. So whilst there are other options, we have a very short sort of 10-week foundation law course called SQE Law Essentials, but I very much see that as a sort of revision course, or a course for people who perhaps have qualified in another jurisdiction and just want to get the academic law up to speed and then move on and do SQE. I think for people who are at your stage, if you've not done a law degree, I think some form of full conversion course is the best way forward in order to allow you to have the most flexibility in terms of your career choices. And that's what employers are wanting. And all of the law firms that we've been dealing with as a university are still continuing to put their non-law graduates, and they recruit probably 50-50 law and non-law graduates. They're putting them all on a proper conversion course akin to the PGDL.
Lovely, thank you. That's really helpful. And I just wanted to go to a student question because it links to it, which a student asked, what is the difference between the PGDL and SQE? And is the GDL now being phased out and replaced by SQE? And I think Jill's answer there answers that for you. I hope so. If not, put another question in the box and we'll get to it. But I think that hopefully helped you there. Lovely. And then so we've kind of talked about SQE1, SQE2, sitting the exams and the prep you're going to need to do potentially to sit those exams and pass them. But then I just wanted to move on to the other side of things, which is the qualifying work experience that goes alongside the SQE to then become a solicitor. Could you talk us through a little bit what counts as qualifying work experience, or QUE as you might see it, and how that is different to the traditional training contract that went hand in hand with the LPC?
Okay, so if we start off with the traditional training contract, so this is known as the recognised period of training and is highly regulated and prescribed by the SRA. And in essence, it amounted to a two-year period spent with one employer. And within that 2-year period, you had to cover 3 seats, so 3 different areas of specialisation, and you also had to do a seat in both contentious and non-contentious practice areas. And in addition to that, there were other sort of additional requirements. So you had to do something called the PSC. We love our 3-letter acronyms, but that's the professional skills course. So having completed that, and provided you met the character and suitability requirements, you would then be admitted as a solicitor. So very structured and quite rigid in some senses. So qualifying work experience is very, very different in that it's defined as being any experience of providing legal services that offers you the opportunity of developing the competences of being a solicitor. And I think it's important to think about it offers you the opportunity of developing. So it's not even that you develop those competencies, you get the opportunity of developing them. So that's the start. The competencies are set out in a framework, and I would sort of recommend, if you're interested, to go onto the SRA's website to have a look at that statement of solicitor competencies. It's a very broad set of competencies, from effectively behaving in an ethical way, being able to draft a document, being able to analyse pieces of information, and so on and so forth. And as far as QWE is concerned, all you have to do is be given the opportunity of developing at least 2 of those competencies. So it's quite narrow. So effectively it means you could spend your 2-year period of doing qualifying work experience pretty much doing the same role. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, the jury's out. But it does build in that flexibility. The other big difference between qualifying work experience and a training contract is that you can do qualifying work experience with up to 4 different employers. So what that allows you to do is you can do blocks of qualifying work experience, and it doesn't have to be a fixed 2-year period. You can do blocks of time, then you can study, and then you could do SQE1, you could then do more qualifying work experience, you could then do SQE2. So it's really, really flexible. And again, I think that's quite exciting for some students. I also think it's quite scary for others, because I think a lot of students like to have a very structured training program and then know they're getting to their 2-year sort of training contract or qualifying work experience. And so what the vast majority, again, of employers that I'm talking to are telling me is that the qualifying work experience that they're going to lay on for their future trainees is actually going to look very similar to a traditional training contract, and they will still allow students to kind of rotate through seats and have different experiences. They will allow them to go and do, for example, seats abroad or seats out with their own clients, and allow them then to have the full range of opportunities when it comes to qualifying, because that's the point where you're kind of picking the practice area that you're going to probably be doing for quite a few years after qualification if you're going to stay as a solicitor. So I think it's great that employers are kind of retaining that rigor in qualifying work experience, because I think it gives you guys a real opportunity to kind of find out what it means to be a solicitor, because often you go into a firm and think, I definitely want to be a human rights lawyer, and actually you find that what you're doing isn't particularly interesting or rewarding when you're doing it on the ground, and suddenly actually becoming a tax lawyer is the bee's knees, and that's what you always really wanted to do, but you didn't think it when you were 21. So I quite like the fact that the training is still going to be fairly rigorous and give you that opportunity to kind of really know what you want to do before you have to make your mind up.
Perfect, thank you. So it sounds like there's going to be a balance there. There's for the students who might want to go on and do some different things with 4 different employers, they'll be able to, they might be able to work in-house at an organisation, but then for students who would prefer a training contract-esque scheme, it's going to be there.
I agree. I think what's great is there's something for everybody in this new regime. I think the majority will probably do a more structured pathway, but it does allow for the outliers to do some really different and interesting things and still be able to qualify as a solicitor. And I think for you guys, if you're doing work experience now, if you've got universities who've got law clinics or you do pro bono activities, you make sure you record that and because it's highly likely to amount to qualifying work experience. So you can already kind of chunk up quite a few months of that 24 months qualifying work experience that you need to qualify before you even start. And certainly, I mean, at the University of Law, for example, on our master's programs, we're offering all of our students as part of the course a period of 1 month's qualifying work experience to sort of get them on the right track. Now, having said that, you can do all this qualifying work experience potentially before, while you're a student, before you qualify, before you study for the SQE, before you sit the SQE. However, if you then get qualifying work experience with a law firm, they may not recognise it, and they may say, no, you're going to do your 2 years with us, and I don't sort of, I'm very glad that you've done that qualifying work experience, and it is really important to kind of help you prepare for interviews with law firms, but they may not recognise it themselves, and that's just something you're going to have to address, as and when you get your own kind of individual contracts of employment.
I actually think that's a really important point there, because you might end up with more than 2 years because you might have done a really cool placement, but I think some big law, you're right, I think some big law firms, even if you've already done a year, will want you to complete the 2 years with them. So, yeah, perfect. Thank you for flagging that up, Jill. I think that's really important. So the next question really I had is, once a student's chosen their route, whether they've decided they're eligible to do the LPC and they're doing that, or they've decided the SQE, what are their next steps in terms of how do they actually get onto that route? What do they need to apply for? Who do they need to apply to?
Yeah, I'm really aware of how much information this generation of students are having to take on board, particularly the law students, because you've still got your options open to do the LPC and the SQE. So it's kind of information overload. So my first piece of advice would be, is obviously you need to think about your career goals and where you want to be when you leave university, and what sort of employer you want to be with. And to a certain extent, if you know that and you are applying for qualifying work experience, or for some of you still there will be training contracts around, they will possibly take some of the pressure off you in terms of next steps, because they will dictate the pathway, particularly if they are law firms that are sponsoring you and paying for your fees to be at law school. So that, I think, helps. I think second piece first, don't panic. You don't need to make any decisions yet. It's only March. Wait until, so I know there's be some third years probably in the room who are thinking, what am I going to do this September? Am I going to do the LPC? Am I going to do the SQE? Don't worry, you don't have to make your decision yet. You'll be able to get onto an LPC or an SQE preparation course in the summer after you have graduated. So don't feel pressurized to kind of rush into the first law school that will have you. I would really also recommend that you go to the law schools that are offering LPCs and SQE preparation courses, and go to one of their open events. Have a look, talk to the staff, but obviously really importantly is talk to the students. See what their experiences are like. Think about where you want to study. There's law schools across the country, and of course there's been a huge development in online legal training, which was already happening before the pandemic, as you can imagine, has become a very, very popular route. And certainly at the moment with our SQE courses, we've got far more online students than we have face-to-face students, although I suspect that will flip back to being kind of in person once we see the tail end of this dreadful pandemic really happen.
Lovely. I think so. To summarise, I think that sounds like, if you apply to a large law firm that's handling, they might dictate, okay, you're doing the SQE and you're doing it with this provider, and then they will kind of organise that for you. Or alternatively, you might apply directly to a law school for the SQE prep course, and then you will be organising your qualifying work experience separately to that, as you deem appropriate.
And I think when you're choosing your law school, if you haven't got qualifying work experience lined up, again, really kind of ask about what they can offer you in terms of support with your with employability, and what their service is like, and what their success rate is like in terms of getting the students qualifying work experience or training contracts or employability in legal services. That's going to be really important. I suppose the only other point I should make about future applications, obviously when you apply for the LPC, you go through the traditional law cabs process. That's still the same for some of the SQE training programs. So certainly at our university, the master's programs, the LLM in legal practice, which is probably the pathway that's most similar to the old LPC in that it's doing SQE1 prep, SQE2 prep, and that additional SQE plus that I was talking about, that you would go through law cabs. So it's the same sort of application process that you'd be familiar with. For just standalone SQE prep courses, there are, in essence, no entry requirements now because of the deregulation of the regime by the SRA. And those literally, you will see from different training providers, you can go on e-stores and just kind of pay your money and check in and get your preparation course. So that is a slightly different regime, and one just to be aware of.
Lovely, thank you. And one last question for me, which, looking at the question box, I think answers quite a lot of students' question as well. What are the costs of qualifying as a solicitor? Is there a difference between the SQE and the LPC?
There certainly is. In the LPC, you had to pass the LPC. You had to take an LPC. It was a prescribed course that you had to go through in order to become a solicitor. And LPCs, the prices of them, varied across the country depending on the location, whether you were in person or you were online. But broadly speaking, it was a pretty significant commitment of money of anything from sort of about 14 to 18,000 pounds, depending on the location. With the SQE, I think the first thing to point out in terms of the costs are the assessments. Those are the responsibility of each individual candidate. Law schools are not paying them on behalf of them. We actually can't, because the system doesn't allow us to, because everybody has to individually register their own account and manage their booking. And the fees in total are £3,980. SQE1 is £1,558, SQE2 is £2,422. Now, again, I think there is a lot of misinformation out there when that first came out, that was all you'd be paying. And therefore, it was a significant reduction in cost to qualifying. And technically, that's right, because if you don't do a prep course and you just take your chance and you read a few manuals and sit the SQE1 and 2, the fees are the only outgoing that you would have to pay. But for the vast majority of students, they will want to do a preparation course. And those preparation courses, where by the time you've added those fees up and the fees to sit the SQE, are not that different from the LPC. And if you're doing a full-blown master's, which has all that additional content that's so important to employers, again, those fees will be more. And not dissimilar from current LPC fees. I guess the only good news is that they are packaged as master's qualifications, which means that for students, you will be potentially eligible for master's funding, which covers the vast majority of those fees. So I think it is still going to be a financial burden or commitment for students to qualify under the new regime. And I think there's been a little bit of disingenuousness by our regulator around the fact that it's a much cheaper route than it was in the past. I think that's not going to be the case.
Thank you for your honesty on that one. It is, I'm sure, very helpful for the students making their decisions. And then the other side of that, we've talked about the costs. And we've talked about actually how, if you've secured training with an employer, it may be that they take on the financial burden or a chunk of it. But is there any other ways that stand out to you that students can receive funding or support?
I think there's obviously the master's loans, employer funding. I think with the SQE, one of the things that it does allow for is that you can kind of break up your qualification into chunks. So you could do your SQE1, then you could work. You can do perhaps long, spread out, part-time preparation courses. So you can kind of learn and earn at the same time and work. And I think that's going to be a pathway for a lot of students. It's very attractive because you will be able to develop a lot of the skills that are assessed in SQE2 on the job, so it will make the whole kind of getting ready for SQE2 much easier. And we're sort of already seeing that in a funny way with the paralegals who are using this route. One other area that I think is really interesting that's developing considerably and has done over the last sort of 2 or 3 years is the apprenticeship route. Now, I think it's probably as graduates, you're all thinking, well, what's that got to do with me? But a lot of quite big employers now are using the apprenticeship route to train their graduate talent. So a lot of the accountancy firms who obviously have large law departments within them, so Deloitte's, KPMG, so on and so forth, the BBC, for example, they send their graduate apprentices to us. They are using that route, which basically is not dissimilar from doing the SQE prep courses that other law firms are sending their students on. It's block training, and then some sort of day release, and then obviously SQE2 at the end as your endpoint assessment as an apprentice. So it's quite a nice route. And of course, as an apprentice, you will be paid, and the apprenticeship levy would cover all of the costs of your SQE assessment. So that's a very attractive route for students, and certainly something I would recommend that you pick up with your careers services at your respective universities. And of course, if you came to the University of Law, you could also discuss with our employability service what options you've got under the graduate apprentice regime to qualify as a solicitor.
Thank you, Jo. Now I'm going to go to a few student questions, if that's okay. The first one is in 2 parts. I'm going to put both parts to you. If you can, just on the off chance that you can answer quickly the first part for this student, but if not, don't worry. The first part is, can you confirm, is the LPC open book? And then the second part, which I think some of the students have also asked, is what is the current time period to complete the SQE compared to the LPC?
Okay, I think I can answer both of those, but as with anything, and being a lawyer, there will be some caveats. So in terms of the LPC being open book, if you study the LPC at the University of Law, the vast majority of the assessments in both stage 1 and 2 are open book, which does mean that you can take in all of your your permitted notes and materials. There are some exceptions when that's not the case. Some of the MCQ tests in professional conduct and wills, for example, are not open book. So, but the vast majority are. Now, each law school will be different on this point. So I'm only going to speak here for the University of Law. And I know at BPP, they will have a mixture of open book and closed book assessments. So it's worth just asking each individual provider where you're thinking of going, what their regime is. What I always, however, say to my students who were on the LPC is that whilst it is open book, and it's great that you've got that fallback with the time of the assessments or the length of the assessments, frankly, I always ask them to treat them as if they were closed book assessments, and to learn everything well in advance, because there simply wouldn't be time to complete all of the different problem solving questions if they were having to look up the answers from reading all their manuals and notes. But they're there as a nice safety net. If suddenly you have a blank and you just go, oh, I just can't remember, you can at least flick to something. Okay, so for the time periods for qualifying, yeah, there are differences. LPC is 5 years. So you've got 5 years from when you start, and you get given a sort of birthday when you start on your LPC, which is triggered by the first assessment that you do. So it's normally, if you started in September, your birthday starts on about the 1st of December of that year, and you've got 5 years then to complete all of the assessments. There are sort of exceptional circumstances when you can ask for an extension of that time period. It's fairly unusual, and that's obviously to protect the public so that your knowledge is fresh and current when you're able to qualify in that regime. SQE, interestingly, is slightly longer. It's 6 years. And I think that's probably because of the fact that they're anticipating that students will split their time between doing SQE1 and 2, or have the potential to do that, rather than doing it all in one chunk, which is the way you would do it on the LPC.
And to confirm, so it can take up to 5 years, it can take up to 6 years. Is that how long students tend to take? Or
No. Normally, that's your length. That's the maximum that you have to have done everything or passed all your assessments by. Otherwise, you have to kind of go back to the beginning. So no, normally I would hope and expect anyone doing the LPC, an LPC traditionally is 1 academic year, so it starts in September, finishes in June, and I would hope they will have their results and have successfully passed everything by August of that year. And similarly with SQE, it's slightly longer because the results are produced by the SRA's assessment provider Kaplan, and the period within which they are saying that they will take to kind of produce those results is a lot longer than would be the case if you were doing an LPC. So SQE2, it's 12 to 14 weeks before you get your results, and you're likely to be doing that at the end of your time of training with us. But again, SQE 1 and 2, if you just did them as standalone courses, they're really different. They're much shorter. So SQE 1 is 12 weeks as a full-time course, and SQE 2 is a 6-week course full-time. If you're doing the masters, it's an academic year because you're doing all that additional content.
Lovely, thank you. And then I'm going to put this next question to you because I think you will want to do some myth busting. We've had a question. Did you say that the SQE does not prepare you as well as the LPC to become a solicitor? I think the answer is going to be no there. And can you still apply for training contracts if you complete the SQE?
Okay, so does it prepare you as well for becoming a solicitor? I think no, because the content covered in SQE is much more limited. And we've done a very detailed knowledge and skills gap analysis. And so, I can take you through that and show you exactly kind of subject by subject where those gaps are. But just to sort of summarize, the big ones are you do not cover in SQE any elective subjects. So those additional practice areas that everybody has to study on the LPC. And you do not have to do the PSC, which again is part of the old LPC regime to qualify as a solicitor. And there's a lot of very valuable content in there that has been lost in the SQE regime. I think it's quite self-evident that doing a whole bunch of multiple choice questions is not necessarily going to be able to put you in a position to do problem solving and critical thinking and analysis on behalf of your client in the way that the LPC would prepare you. And that's another gap that we are plugging through our master's program. Okay, so I hope that answers the first part of that question. I think, was there a second part?
Yes, it was, can you still apply to training contracts if you complete the SQE?
No. If you do the SQE, you have to do qualifying work experience. So you would apply for a period of qualifying work experience with your employer. You have to do an LPC to do a training contract.
But as Jill mentioned earlier, chances are the qualifying work experience is, a lot of law firms are going to offer something that is very alike training contracts. In essence, it may just be a different word.
Yeah, and I think one thing I can also try and sort of reassure you, because I think for third years who are likely to be really having a dilemma between the LPC and the SQE for this September, and I do feel for you because it is really difficult if you haven't already got your training contract. What would you do? I think probably at the moment the balance is just in favour of doing the LPC because it's still so tried and tested. And it's what lawyers know and recognise. And if you don't get a training contract at the end of it, you can do qualifying work experience, and doing the LPC does exempt you from SQE1. Now, that does mean you'd have to do SQE2, but you would hope that by then you had got your qualifying work experience, you'd be able to develop the skills, you'd be able to study for them, although you'd have already covered the vast majority of material you'd need on your LPC, and you might hope that your employer would make a significant contribution to you having to sit those SQE2 exams. And that's really what we've got at the moment on our SQE2 prep course. We've got a lot of LPC students who are using it as a way to qualify using qualifying work experience who've not been able to get training contracts. So I think you've got options there which you wouldn't have with the SQE.
Okay, and I think we might have time for one or two more questions. We have one is, do employers view the LPC and SQE as equal, or do they view one as better?
They certainly don't view them as equal. They are very, very different, and I think it's important to recognise that. I don't think I think probably 5 years ago, law firms were much more vociferous about whether they thought one was better than the other. I think now there's just an acceptance that they're different. And I think where employers have come to is they see that it's rigorous. That I think their future trainees will know a lot more academic law when they walk through the door than perhaps they did after the LPC. But there will be some big gaps. And I think what employers are doing very sensibly is looking at how they work with law schools to kind of create a really robust training course for their future talent that gets them ready for the world of work. And so long as they've got that, they're very happy, because there's no reason why you can't top up the SQE and those gaps through providing additional training, and you can basically make that additional training exactly what you want it to look and feel like.
Lovely. And we have had some questions about conversion courses and non-law graduate, but I think hopefully Jill has done a good job of answering those questions for you in her previous. So I'm going to squeeze in one more, which is, we've had a question: what's the best option for international students studying the LLM?
So international students studying the LLM, which is, I'm presuming they haven't got a qualifying law degree, means that I think they're going to have to do the SQE regime. I think what they've got to do is talk to their future law school who's going to provide them with SQE training and preparation, and sort of map across whether or not the content of their masters does cover the academic law knowledge that's required for SQE1, because often masters, from my own experience, are very specialised in particular areas of law. So whether it's kind of medical ethics, or it's corporate governance, or advanced dispute resolution, but that won't give you the breadth or the range of academic law that you need for SQE. So it's highly likely that for master's students, some form of short conversion course is going to be necessary to put you in the best position possible to pass SQE, and then do an SQE prep course as well, which will cover the vocational subjects. I mean, there are SQE prep courses out there that cover both academic law and practice contexts. So that's another possibility for master's students.
Perfect. Thank you very much for answering that. I'm afraid we have come to our time limit, but I'm looking at the questions. I think, Jill, you've done a great job of answering quite a lot of them in the questions I asked. So thank you for taking the time to be with us here today. And if you have any more questions, you can contact the University of Law or equivalent providers. You can watch the Target Jobs webinar series. There's an article on the SQE on Target Jobs as well if you search for it. So I hope that helps you with taking your next steps. One last big thank you to Jill before the webinar ends.
Thanks very much, Rachel, and to all of you for being here today.
Thank you. Goodbye.